Hello true believers. I don't think it's crazy to say that the Sentry has been a very divisive character at times. Even the biggest die-hard Sentry fan will admit that the Sentry went through some rough times as a character. The worst years for him were probably 2009 and 2010. The writers had written themselves into a corner with the Sentry. A lot of Marvel fans were not happy with the situation. Regular Marvel fans were not happy with the bloody stupid god from the machine that the Sentry had become. And Sentry fans were not happy with how one of their favorite characters got treated. Almost all of the appealing aspects of the Sentry were pushed aside, all for the sake of the plot. In the end, the Sentry was in a gigantic need of a complete rework. I personally wanted to see a couple of specific things done with the Sentry in order to make him more appealing to a bigger audience. And to my surprise, Jeff Lemire has already tackled a bunch of these points in the very first issue of his run on the Sentry. For example, Bob had to be put more at the forefront. Bob has always been the human core of the Sentry and the link between him and the readers. Jeff Lemire establishes that link by portraying Bob as a man who lives a boring and uneventful life. Bob cannot wait to dive into an alternate reality where he gets to be a golden guardian of good and a shining beacon of hope. I'm sure that just like Bob, every passionate comic book reader wishes to be something more and live a spectacular and exciting life. Another important thing was to pull the Void back a little bit. Listen, I love the Void as much as the next best Sentry fan, but when every Sentry story is only about the Void, it gets a little bit boring. There came a point where the Void was holding the Sentry back too much. Instead, it is more important to focus on the Sentry and other opponents he had over the years. Jeff Lemire has already stated that he wants to take the Sentry and the Void into another direction, and that other Sentry opponents will play an important role first. Then, Sentry also had to get a supporting cast back. It is very hard to have a solo character do everything without friends and family to support them during good and hard times. Last but not least was the inclusion of the non-canon book The Age of the Sentry into regular Marvel continuity. That would have added a lot of new lore to the Sentry as a character and a bunch of cool and colorful bad guys. These characters also had to be reinvented and made more creepy to fit the tone of the canon Sentry. Jeff Lemire has done just that. Not only did he implement at least one bad guy from The Age of the Sentry, he has also reinvented him in a cool way. But more on that in a future video. So in my eyes, Jeff Lemire is doing everything right so far. He also immediately makes sure to give us what we have come to expect from the Sentry. When Captain America throws his mighty shield, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, and the Sentry rips bitches in half. That is one of Sentry's signature go-to moves. The Reynolds special, so to say. His other signature go-to move is throwing his opponents into the sun, which we get to see only a few pages later. So, as you can see, Jeff Lemire has certainly done his homework on the Sentry. But the goodness does not stop there. The Conflactor device plays a big part in the first issue. The Conflactor itself is not really basic Sentry knowledge. It is something only die-hard Sentry fans know about. The Conflactor comes from a planet named Temporalon, which was destroyed by the Void many years ago. Sentry used the Conflactor to enter a dimension called the Negative Zone and imprison his opponents inside. And now, in the new Sentry book, the Conflactor is once again being used to access another reality. That reality has been created by Doctor Strange inside Sentry's mind. It has the benefit of automatically repairing itself. We see that after the Sentry destroys the moon. The entire story takes place few months after Sentry's return in Doctor Strange issue number 382. Now Bob spends most of the day in his regular persona. He is only allowed to become the Sentry inside the alternate reality in his mind. In there, his task is to beat the Void into submission time and time again. Bob is not allowed to become the Sentry in the standard reality because that would summon the Void as well and initiate the end of the world. In his life as plain old Bob Reynolds, Bob lives in a shitty ass apartment and works as a cook together with his old sidekick Billy, also known as Scout. Personality wise, Scout's portrayal is very interesting and appealing. Look wise, they have removed the scar he had over one of his eyes in older Sentry comics. We also meet another character, a lady called Jenny, who is the powerful Sentress in the alternate reality in Bob's mind. In the regular reality, she might be the future damsel in distress, or even better, Bob's new love interest. In either case, Jenny already has a special place in my heart. The first boob I ever touched belonged to a girl, who was also called Jenny. True Hollywood story. Anyway, Bob mentions that he has an ex-wife who doesn't want to talk to him. This might be an error in the continuity, since Bob's wife Lindy was killed by the bloodthirsty maniac Bullseye. However, she was already killed before, but the Sentry resurrected her from the dead and also healed her wounds simply by touching her. So it is not out of question that the Sentry resurrected his wife once more off panel. She must have left him then, because one can take being killed only so many times. On second thought, dear Jenny, stay the fuck away from Bob. On his way home, Bob comes across another character. This time it's Misty Knight, a strong and independent black secret agent woman who ain't got no time for Bob shit. Misty works for an agency which is monitoring Bob's every step in order to prevent him from slipping and becoming the Void once again. Luckily for Bob, Misty seems to be on his side and is one of the people who have vouched for him. She wants to believe that he can control the Void, and so does Tony Stark. But here is the weird part. Why does that agency not make Bob's life easier for him? Why do they make his life harder by letting him live in a shitty apartment with barely enough money to get through the day? Bob should live in a castle made out of gold. He should be fed grapes by unwilling interns all day long. He should have everything just to be happy and keep the Void away. But these lazy motherfuckers don't even give him a ride home. And what about Tony Stark? Why does Tony Stark not give Bob a small loan of $1 million? Tony Stark is a billionaire. He probably has more than $10 billion on his bank account. Here, allow me to show you how insignificant $1 million are to someone like Tony Stark. Here you have $1 million. Here you have $10 million. Here you have $100 million. Here you have $1 billion. And finally, here you have $10 billion. Now, let's take $1 million out of these 10 billion and show you how much is still left. I'm still scrolling. Still scrolling. And scrolling some more. This should show you how many fucks that greedy asshole Tony Stark should give about $1 million. Anyway, for now, Bob has to live in a shitty apartment, which lacks basic security, even though it contains the conflictor, the only thing that prevents the Void from destroying everything. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, I should not have asked. Have a nice day, and as always, stay vigilant.